My wife hadn't been in the ground a day. When my son sat in her chair, the chair where she embroidered every afternoon, he looked me in the eye and said, "Your good life is over, Dad." Then he took my cards, froze my accounts, left me without a dollar to my name, and looked at me as if I were trash to be taken out. 82 years of building. And in one morning, my son erased me from the map. If this story touches your soul, subscribe. Every day there's a new story that could be yours. Tell us where you're listening from. I still have the smell of cemetery earth on my hands. No matter how much I wash them, it's still there. That damp, deep smell of something buried. I can still feel the weight of her casket, how my arms trembled, how I felt I was sinking right along with her. And here I am, sitting in my own living room, staring at a dead cell phone and a stack of cards that are now useless. I have them spread out on the table like cards from a lost hand. My name is Arthur Graham. Bellwether, I am 82 years old, and 40 years ago I built an auto parts factory that today provides jobs for 120 families. 40 years of waking up before dawn, 40 years of sweat, of risk, of sleepless nights. But none of that matters now because yesterday I buried my wife, and today my son buried me. Eleanor died on Thursday at 6 in the evening. I was sitting by her bed, as I had every day for the last 3 years. I knew every sound in that room, the hum of the air conditioning, the drip of the IV, the constant beep of the monitor that tracked her heart. Kidney failure had eaten away at her body, bit by bit, but she never complained. Not once. That afternoon, the monitor started to sound different, slower, more spaced out, like a clock winding down. She opened her eyes and looked for me, those brown eyes that I fell in love with 60 years ago. I took her hand. It was cold, so cold. I tried to warm it with mine, but I couldn't. She squeezed my fingers with what little strength she had left and said, "It doesn't hurt anymore. My dear, it doesn't hurt." Then she took a breath, then another, and on the third, the air didn't come out again. The monitor went to a flat line and a long, steady beep that I still hear when I close my eyes. And I just stayed there, with her hand in mine, unable to let go, unwilling to let go, because I knew that when I did, everything would be over. The viewing was on Friday. The funeral home smelled of old flowers and candle wax. People came, hugged me, said things I didn't hear. She's in a better place. She's not suffering anymore. She was a great woman. Empty words that bounced off my ears without sinking in. Ethan stood seriously in a corner for a while, his arms crossed. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just watched. He watched the casket. He watched the people. He watched me. But he never came over to hug me. That night I came home alone. The house was dark and smelled closed up. I lay down on our bed, on my usual side, and hugged Eleanor's pillow. I buried my face in it. It still smelled of her gardenia perfume, the scent I first knew when I was 22, and that had been with me every day since. I closed my eyes and tried to imagine she was there, sleeping beside me as always, that I would wake up and everything would be like it was before. But on Saturday at 9 in the morning, the doorbell rang and everything went to hell. I opened the door expecting a neighbor with condolences, a basket of bread, some flowers, but it was Ethan. His shirt was wrinkled and his eyes were dry. He walked into the house without a greeting, without a hug, without saying, "I'm sorry, Dad," as if he were walking into an office. Behind him was Jessica, his wife, with her head down and her eyes fixed on the floor. She didn't look at me, didn't say a word. And behind her was Ryan, my 16-year-old grandson, who didn't look up from his phone even to say hello. I don't even know if he saw me. I offered them coffee. No one answered. Ethan walked straight to the living room with firm steps, as if the house were already his. And then I saw it. He sat in Eleanor's chair, the chair where she embroidered every afternoon, where she drank her chamomile tea, where she would sit and read me recipes from the newspaper while I ate breakfast. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my chest. Bile reached my throat, but I kept quiet. I thought maybe he didn't realize, maybe it was an accident, maybe it wasn't on purpose. Ethan looked at me from that chair as if he were already the owner of everything. And what I saw in his eyes wasn't sadness, wasn't grief, wasn't anything a son should feel the day after. Burying his mother, it was something cold, calculated, something I didn't recognize. Or maybe I did recognize it but had never wanted to see it. He said, "Dad, we need to talk." I nodded. I thought it was about the funeral, the paperwork, Eleanor's will, the insurance claims. But then he reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a document, a sheet with official seals and tiny print that I couldn't read from where I was standing. He placed it on the coffee table, on top of the magazines Eleanor never finished flipping through, and said, "Sign here. It's a power of attorney. From now on, I'm in charge of the accounts, the company, everything. It's for your own good. You're not in any condition." I looked at him, not understanding, not believing what I was hearing. I said, "What are you talking about, Ethan? I buried your mother yesterday. What kind of son are you?" He didn't blink, didn't move a muscle in his face, just said, "That's precisely why." I refused to sign. I told him he was crazy, that he didn't know what he was doing, that he should get out of my house and not come back until he'd come to his senses. He stood up slowly with the calm of a snake, put the paper back in his pocket and looked down at me. He was a head taller than me, and in that moment I realized my son was looking at me as an obstacle, as something to be removed from the path. He said, "Fine, then we do this the hard way. Your choice." And he walked toward the door, unhurried, as if he already knew exactly what was going to happen next. Jessica followed him without looking at me, shuffling her feet. Ryan, too, with his phone glued to his face, oblivious to everything, as if nothing was happening. I stood there in the middle of the living room, my heart pounding so hard in my chest I could feel it in my ears. I didn't understand what the hard way meant, but half an hour later I found out, and the floor opened up beneath my feet. First, it was the cell phone. I was in the kitchen pouring a glass of water because my mouth was dry when the screen suddenly went black. A white message appeared. "Line cancelled by account holder." I felt a void in my stomach. I went to the desktop computer to check my bank account. I sat down, opened the web page, entered my usual password, Eleanor's date of birth with my initials, the one I'd used for 20 years, invalid credentials. I entered it again, more carefully, letter by letter. "Account locked. Please contact your branch." I felt a cold sweat run down my back, between my shoulder blades. My hands started to tremble over the keyboard. I went to the landline in the living room and dialed the bank's number. Recording told me the number was in the process of being transferred to another account holder. I hung up and stared at the phone as if it were a dead animal. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. I repeated those words out loud, as if saying them could change what was happening, but nothing changed. I walked through the house like a sleepwalker, trying to understand what had just happened. My feet felt heavy. My head was spinning. I went to the desk and opened the drawer where I kept emergency cash. A wad of bills I'd kept for years. Just in case, $500 in 20s and 50s, wrapped in a rubber band. The drawer was empty. Not a single bill, not even the rubber band. I felt a hole in my chest. I checked the pockets of all my jackets in the closet one by one, looking for anything, whatever it might be. Nothing. Loose change, an old piece of gum, wrinkled receipts. I went to the bedroom and looked on Eleanor's nightstand, where she kept a few dollars for the Sunday collection plate, in a small wooden box her mother had given her. Also empty, the Box was there, open, mocking me. Ethan had come into my house before he came to see me. He had gone through everything. He had opened every drawer, every pocket, every hiding place. He had taken every dollar he found. I stood in the middle of the room with my hands shaking, feeling the floor move beneath my feet as if in an earthquake. In less than an hour, my own son had left me with no access to the bank, no phone, no cash. He had turned me into a homeless man in my own house. I don't know how long I stood there in the middle of the room staring into nothing. Minutes, hours, time ceased to exist. When I came to, the sun was gone and the house was dark. I hadn't turned on a single light, hadn't eaten anything, hadn't had any water. I shuffled to the living room and sat on Eleanor's couch, the same one where she would embroider every afternoon while I read the newspaper and she told me gossip about the neighbors. I ran my hand over the fabric of the backrest. Worn by the years, there was still a thread stuck. In it, from the last piece, she didn't get to finish. A tablecloth with blue flowers she was making for the new dining room set. For when we remodel, she'd say, it'll look beautiful. The dining set we would never use, the tablecloth she would never finish. I stayed there, stroking that thread until my eyes blurred. I didn't eat that night. I couldn't. My stomach was a tight knot, hard as a rock. I felt nauseous just thinking about food. I sat there in the dark, without turning on the lights, looking at the portrait of Eleanor above the fireplace, the photo from our 50th anniversary. We took it in the garden, next to the rose bushes she planted. She was in her blue dress that came down to her knees, smiling with all her teeth, her hair pulled back the way she liked it. I was hugging her by the waist, looking at her as if the rest of the world didn't exist, because for me, it didn't. She was everything. I spoke to her out loud, in the dark, with a broken voice. I said, "Eleanor, what did I do wrong? Where did I go wrong with that boy? How did I raise him so badly? What did he lack? What did he have too much of? What did I do to make him hate me like this?" But she didn't answer. Of course not, because she wasn't there anymore. And I was more alone than I had ever been in my life. I didn't sleep a minute that night. I sat on that couch until dawn, replaying the last few months in my mind like a movie. Ethan's visits, more and more frequent, longer and longer. The questions about the company, about the partners, about the accounts, about the contracts, about who had signing authority. I thought it was interest, that he was finally maturing, that he wanted to learn the business, that he wanted to earn my trust. But it wasn't recognition. He was scouting the terrain, looking for weak points, waiting for the right moment to strike, and the right moment was the day after burying his mother, the day I was most broken, most vulnerable, most alone, easiest to knock down. He planned it that way, with coldness, with calculation, as if I were an enemy and not his father. But the worst part wasn't what had already happened. The worst was what awaited me outside, because when I went out onto the street the next day, I discovered that my son hadn't just stolen my money. He had stolen my name. On Monday, I woke up with the decision to go out. I couldn't stay locked up within those walls, waiting for Ethan to come and finish me off. I had to understand how far the damage went. I had to see with my own eyes how much he had destroyed me. I got in the shower, and the water came out. Ice cold. The water heater wouldn't light. I stood there under the cold stream, shivering, feeling each drop hit me like a punishment. I dressed in the same clothes as yesterday because I didn't have the mental energy to look for anything else. I buttoned my shirt with clumsy fingers. I put on my shoes without socks because I couldn't find any. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw an old man I didn't recognize. Sunken eyes surrounded by purple circles, ashen skin without color like a dead man's, a 2-day-old beard, white and patchy. I looked like a homeless person. I looked like a madman. I searched my wallet for 3 crumpled bills, $20. It was all I had left in the world, all I had to survive on. I went out onto the street with an empty stomach and a heavy heart. The sun hit my face and I had to squint. I didn't know that on that day I would be humiliated 3 times, each one worse than the last. First, I went to Miller's Pharmacy on the corner of Main and Jefferson, where I'd been buying my medication for 10 years. I needed my blood pressure pill, the one I take every morning with breakfast. Without it, I could have a crisis at any moment. The doctor had warned me. "Mr. Bellwether, you don't play games with your heart." The young woman at the counter recognized me when I walked in and smiled kindly. "Good morning, Mr. Bellwether. How are you? Feeling better?" I told her thank you, that I was there for my medicine. I gave her the prescription and waited, leaning on the counter, looking at the shelves of vitamins and syrups. She prepared the order, put it in a small white bag, and ran the card through the terminal. The machine made a noise, that noise you know, declined. She ran it again, more slowly. Declined. She looked at me uncomfortably, her cheeks flushing, and said, "I'm sorry, sir. It's not going through. Do you have another card?" I felt a heat rise up my neck. I took out one of my 3 bills and paid in cash. The change was barely enough for a coffee. I left with the paper bag and a bitter taste in my mouth, but that was just the beginning, the warm-up before the main event. I walked to the bank with heavy legs, the central branch of Ohio Valley Trust, in the pink limestone building across from the square. I'd had an account there for over 40 years. It was where I signed my first loan to buy the factory machinery. It was where I deposited my first million, the proudest day of my life. Everyone there knew me, the tellers, the guards, the secretaries, the managers. They greeted me by name, offered me coffee, saw me in private. But when I walked in that morning, I saw new faces, young people, in cheap suits and plastic smiles, people who didn't know who I was. I asked to speak with the manager. The receptionist looked me up and down, my wrinkled clothes, my unshaven beard, and said, "Please take a seat. Someone will be with you shortly." They made me wait for 20 minutes on a hard plastic chair by the door, as if I were just any customer coming to ask for a loan. Finally, a guy in a grey suit came out, 30-something, with gel in his hair and a face that said he had more important things to do. He looked at me with no respect and said, "Follow me." And he led me to a small cubicle with glass walls, where everyone could see but no one could hear, like a fishbowl, like a zoo cage. The manager sat behind a melamine desk and opened his computer. He typed something with 2 fingers slowly while I watched him from the other side. Then he frowned, tilted his head, and looked at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. He said in a low but sharp voice, like a knife wrapped in velvet, "Mr. Bellwether, your account has a preventive hold on it. It was requested 2 days ago by a direct family member, a son, according to the record. The reason given is—" He paused for a long time, as if it were hard for him to say it, as if he felt second-hand embarrassment. "Presumed cognitive incapacitation." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The air left my lungs. I repeated the words like an echo. Cognitive incapacitation. He nodded without looking me in the eye, shuffling papers on his desk. He said, "It means there are doubts about your mental capacity to manage your own resources. It's a standard procedure in these cases. Don't worry, it's temporary until the family situation is resolved." I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to stand up and grab him by the tie and tell him I had built more in 1 year than he would build in his entire life, that I provided jobs for 120 families while he couldn't even type properly. But I couldn't. The words wouldn't come. I sat there mute, my mouth open, feeling the world crumble around me. I got up from the chair without saying anything and walked out of the cubicle. The receptionist said something I didn't hear. The guard opened the door for me. I walked out onto the street and felt my legs tremble, felt like they wouldn't hold me. A cold sweat ran down my neck and soaked my back. People passed by me, walking normally, buying things, talking on the phone, laughing, living their lives, and I felt like they were all looking at me, that they all knew, that they were all thinking, "There goes the crazy old man, the one who can't even manage his own money." I leaned against a limestone wall next to a newsstand and took several deep breaths, trying to calm down. My heart was beating very fast, too fast. I thought, I'm going to have a heart attack right here on the street. They'll find me lying here like a dog. I needed to sit down, needed to eat something, to fill my stomach with anything. Then I thought of the Founder's Grill, the restaurant where I'd had lunch for over 30 years. I had a monthly tab there that I paid promptly on the 1st of every month without fail. They knew me there, had me for a lifetime. They treated me like what I was. There, I was still someone. I walked the 4 blocks to the center of town with my hands shaking and my stomach growling. I walked in through the carved wooden door, and the waiter, Julian, saw me immediately. He smiled that same old smile and said, "Mr. Art, so good to see you. Your usual table." I sat in my usual spot, by the window overlooking the square, where I could watch people go by as I ate. I ordered my usual: grilled steak, medium rare, fresh corn tortillas, a side of pinto beans, and a coffee with cinnamon. I ate slowly, chewing each bite, trying to taste the meat, the salt, the spice, trying to feel that I still existed, that I was still the man I had been, the one who came here to close deals, the one who invited his partners to lunch, the one who left good tips because he could. I looked around and saw familiar faces. Mr. Paredes, the lawyer, at a corner table with his wife eating salad. Mr. Harrison from the Rotary Club at another table with some associates discussing something with papers in hand. Dr. Villanueva at the bar, drinking a black coffee. People who had greeted me with respect for decades, people who knew me when this was a small town and I was a young man with big dreams. When I finished eating, I called Julian over with a wave of my hand and said, "Put it on my monthly tab." He nodded, cleared the plates, and headed for the kitchen. But he took a long time to come back. Too long. And I felt that something was wrong. When Julian returned, he was walking slowly and wouldn't look me in the eye. He held his hands together as if he were nervous. He said in a low voice, almost a whisper, "Mr. Art, I'm sorry. The manager wants to speak with you." I felt my stomach drop, that empty feeling you get when you know something bad is coming. The manager appeared a moment later, a fat man with a mustache whom I'd known for years but had never liked. He approached my table but didn't sit down. He stood there looking down at me, with his arms crossed over his belly, and spoke just loud enough for the surrounding tables to hear every word. "Mr. Bellwether, unfortunately, your account with us has been cancelled. Mr. Ethan Bellwether called yesterday personally to inform us. He left very clear instructions that you are no longer in your right mind. He said we are not to extend you any credit under any circumstances, that any debt you incur, he will not recognize or pay. I'm very sorry. You'll have to pay in cash." I felt my face burn. The blood rushed to my head. My ears were ringing. I saw, as if in slow motion, the couple at the next table stop eating and turn to look at me with their mouths open. I saw Mr. Paredes lean toward his wife and whisper something in her ear, gesturing toward me with his chin. I saw Mr. Harrison look down at his plate, uncomfortable, as if he were ashamed to know me. Everyone looking at me, everyone judging me, everyone thinking the same thing. Poor old man. He's lost his mind. He's finished. He's useless. He's to be pitied. I took out the 2 bills I had left, $10, and put them on the table. It wasn't even enough for the coffee. Julian, with sad eyes, said, "Mr. Arthur, don't worry, I'll cover it from my tips. It's no—" But I didn't let him finish. I didn't want his pity. I didn't want anyone's pity. I stood up from the chair, my knees trembling, and walked toward the door. Each step felt like lead. Each step was a mile. I felt the stairs burning into my back like knives, like needles, like hot coals. I stepped out onto the sidewalk and stood there, not knowing what to do, not knowing where to go. The midday sun beat down on my face, burning my skin, but I felt cold, a cold that came from inside, from my bones, from my soul. I had no money, no phone, no one to call, nowhere to go. I looked at the cobblestone street I had walked 1,000 times since I was a child. The same shops, the same trees, the same iron benches, but everything seemed strange, as if it were no longer mine, as if I no longer belonged there, as if I had been erased from the map and no one had noticed. I thought of Eleanor, of how she always knew what to do when things got tough, how she always had a word, an idea, a solution, how she would take my hand and tell me, "You can do this, my dear, you've always been able to." But she was gone, and I was alone, completely alone, in the middle of a street full of people. I had never felt so alone in my life. Then I heard a voice behind me, a woman's voice, timid, worried. "Mr. Arthur." I turned around slowly, almost without strength. It was Mrs. Rosemary Logan, my neighbor from number 12 in her 70s, a widow for a decade, always with her 2 cats and her floral apron. We had known each other by sight for 30 years. We'd say hello on the street, but we'd never exchanged more than 3 words. We'd never had a real conversation. She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes, as if she were seeing a ghost. Then she glanced quickly to the sides, as if making sure no one was watching, that no one was listening. She took a step closer, grabbed my arm with her small hand, and said in a low voice, almost a secret, "What happened to you, Mr. Arthur? Why are you like this? Are you sick? You look terrible. You look like you've seen a ghost." And I didn't know what to answer. The words wouldn't come out, because in a way, the ghost was me. They had killed me without touching me. They had buried me without digging a grave. Rosemary took my arm firmly and said, "Come with me. You can't just stand here. People are staring." We walked in silence to her house, 3 blocks down, through streets I knew by heart but which now seemed like another world. I kept my eyes on the ground, unable to look up, counting the cobblestones as if they were the days I had left to live. When we reached her door, a green door with pots of geraniums, she took out her keys, opened it, and led me inside. It smelled of freshly brewed coffee and sweet bread. Her 2 cats looked at me with suspicion from an armchair. Rosemary sat me down in her living room and went to the kitchen. I heard the clatter of cups, of boiling water. She returned with a tray, chamomile tea, animal crackers, an embroidered napkin. She served me as if I were a sick child, and in a way I was. My hands trembled as I took the cup. She sat across from me in a floral armchair that smelled of mothballs and looked at me with those eyes that women who have seen too much have. She said, "Arthur, I'm going to tell you what's happening, what all of Dayton is saying, because you need to know, and because no one else is going to tell you." I nodded without speaking. The tea was burning my fingers, but I didn't let go. I needed to feel something, anything. Rosemary took a deep breath and began to speak. She told me that Ethan had been calling everyone over the past week, business partners, acquaintances from the club, neighbors from the subdivision. He was telling everyone the same thing, that I had dementia, that I had started to forget things, to mix up names, to get lost on the street. That on the day of the funeral, I didn't recognize some of the guests, that I had tried to pay with an expired credit card, that I was a danger to myself, and that the family was taking steps to protect me. She told me everything in a rush, without pausing, like someone ripping off a bandage in one go. And I just sat there, frozen, paralyzed, with the teacup suspended in mid-air and a ringing in my ears that wouldn't let me think. When I could speak, only one word came out: dementia. I repeated it several times, as if saying it could help me understand. I looked at my hands, steady, not trembling. I remembered the company's last quarterly balance sheet, 23.4 million in assets, 15.7 in liabilities, operating margin of 12%. Remembered it all, without hesitation. I remembered my first driver's license number, my wedding date, the name of the doctor who delivered Ethan. I remembered every contract I had signed in the last 40 years and thought, my son is killing me. Not with a knife, not with poison. He's killing me with words. He's erasing me from the map while I'm still breathing. Rosemary watched me in silence, waiting for my reaction. I handed her the empty cup and stood up. My legs were shaking, but I held myself steady. I said, "Thank you, Rosemary, for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy person." She stood up too and took my arm. She said, "Arthur, you have to do something. If you stay quiet, they'll bury you alive. Ethan is moving fast. He has lawyers. He has contacts. If you don't react now, by the time you want to, it will be too late." I nodded. I walked to the door. Before leaving, I turned and said, "I'm going to the company. I'm going to prove who I am. I'm going to stand in front of my son and tell him he's not going to destroy me." She looked at me with a mix of admiration and fear, and I walked out onto the street with my heart pounding in my throat. I arrived at the factory at 4 in the afternoon, the same factory I built with my own hands, the same gate I had passed through thousands of times over 40 years. The usual guard, Mr. Firmin, was gone. In his place was a young man in his 20s with a new uniform and an unfriendly face. When he saw me arrive, he held up his hand as if he were a traffic cop. He said, "Identification, please." I looked at him in disbelief. I said, "I'm Arthur Bellwether, the owner of this company, the one who pays your salary." The young man didn't flinch. He looked at a sheet of paper on his desk, ran his finger down a list and said without looking at me, "I'm sorry, sir. Your name is not authorized for entry. Orders from management." I felt the blood rush to my head. I clenched my fists. I said, "Look, kid, I founded this company before you were born. I laid every brick, installed every machine, invested every dollar that's in here. So you are going to lift that barrier and you are going to let me pass." The young man looked at me with a calmness that made me angrier than if he had shouted. He said, "Sir, if you don't calm down, I'm going to have to call security." "Security on me?" I took a deep breath, swallowed my rage and said, "Fine, call someone from inside, anyone. Let them tell me to my face that I can't come in." The young man nodded, picked up a phone, spoke in a low voice for a minute, then hung up and said, "Can you wait in the reception area? Someone will be down to see you." I walked into the reception area and sat in one of those plastic chairs they have for vendors. Me sitting like a vendor in my own company. I waited 5 minutes, 10, 20. The receptionist, another new face, didn't even look at me. She typed on her computer as if I didn't exist. Finally, the door to the hallway opened and a young woman appeared in her early 30s. Straight hair to her shoulders, grey pantsuit, high heels, a perfect smile. One of those smiles that don't reach the eyes. She walked toward me with short steps and extended her hand as if I were a client. She said, "Mr. Bellwether, what a pleasure. I'm Audrey Price, executive assistant to Mr. Ethan. How can I help you?" I looked her up and down. I had never seen her before in my life. I said, "I want to speak with my son." She didn't lose her smile. She said, "Mr. Ethan is in a very important meeting. He can't be interrupted. If you'd like, I can schedule an appointment for you next week. How about Thursday at 10? I looked at her, unable to believe it. I said, "An appointment to speak with my own son in my own company." She tilted her head as if I were a confused old man. She said, "I understand this may be difficult, Mr. Bellwether, but things have changed. There are new processes, new protocols. It's all for the good of the company." She spoke to me as if I were a nuisance, as if I were nobody. And the worst part is, she did it with a smile. I stood up and walked toward the hallway that led to the offices. Audrey stood in front of me with her arms outstretched as if to physically stop me. She said, "Mr. Bellwether, you can't pass. If you insist, I'll have to call security." I stopped, looked her in the eyes, and then I looked around. The marble floor I had chosen, the walls I had painted white because Eleanor said it was calming, the paintings I bought at an auction in Chicago were gone. In their place were some horrible abstract paintings, the kind that mean nothing. Everything had changed, everything. I said, "This company is mine. I built it." Audrey smiled again and said, "It was yours, Mr. Bellwether. Things are different now." And in her voice there was no mockery. There was something worse. There was pity. I left without another word. I walked through the parking lot with my head on fire, and then I saw them. Two old-timers, Martinez from production, who'd been with me for 25 years, and Lomeli from maintenance, who started as a janitor and I promoted to supervisor. They were smoking by a van. When they saw me, they froze. Martinez looked away. Lomeli lowered his head. Neither of them greeted me, neither said a word. I walked past them, hoping for a gesture, a word, something, but nothing. I got in my car and saw them in the rearview mirror, still there, cigarettes in hand, watching me leave. They were afraid. Afraid of being seen talking to me, afraid of losing their jobs, afraid of Ethan. I started the car and drove away, not knowing where to go. I drove through streets I knew by heart, but that now seemed alien. I passed the park where I used to take Ethan as a child, the church where I married Eleanor, the school where Benjamin studied. Everything the same, everything different. I was the one who had changed. Or rather, I was the one they had changed. I drove until the sun went down and the streets grew dark. The gas tank was on empty. I had no money for gas, nowhere to go, no one. I parked on a street I didn't know, in a neighborhood of low houses and mechanic shops, and I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, staring into nothing, thinking, I'm losing everything and I don't know where to start fighting. But what I didn't know was that someone was watching me, and that person was about to change everything. I parked on an unfamiliar street, and I don't know how long I stayed there, minutes, maybe an hour. I had been driving in circles, not knowing where to go. The car died on its own when the little gas it had left ran out. I stayed in the dark with my hands still gripping the steering wheel, looking through the dirty windshield. The neighborhood was humble. One-story houses with faded facades, mechanic shops with their shutters half closed, a small grocery store with a flickering yellow light bulb, a small church at the end of the street with a blue neon cross. I thought, I have no money for gas, no money for a taxi, no money to eat, no one to call. And I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, something I thought I could no longer feel, fear, pure and cold, like when I was a child and got lost at the fair. Then someone knocked on the window, 3 sharp taps. I jumped, turned my head, and saw a face looking at me from outside. An older man in his 70s, with grey hair and skin weathered by the sun. His hands were stained with black grease, and he wore a faded blue jumpsuit. He looked at me with curiosity, not hostility. I rolled down the window a few inches, and he said, "Good evening, sir. Are you all right? You've been sitting there for a long time without getting out of the car. I wanted to make sure nothing happened to you." His voice was hoarse but kind. He smelled of motor oil and cigarettes. I said, "I'm fine, thank you." But my voice came, but my outbroken, cracked, and he noticed. The man looked at me for a few seconds without saying anything. Then he nodded slowly, as if he had made a decision. He said, "Look, I have a garage right across the street. I don't know what happened to you, and I won't ask if you don't want to tell me, but you look like you haven't eaten in a while. I have fresh coffee and some biscuits my neighbor brought me. If you like, I'll treat you." No strings attached. I looked him in the eyes. There was no malice, no agenda, just something I hadn't seen in days. Humanity. I opened the car door and got out. My legs were shaking. He held my arm and said, "Come on, sir, it's just over here." And we walked together to his garage. The garage was small, a tin shed with an oil-stained concrete floor. There was an old car on a lift with its hood open and its guts exposed, tools hanging on the wall, a 3-year-old calendar with a picture of Jesus, an old radio playing a Johnny Cash song. The man pointed to a plastic chair next to a wooden table and said, "Have a seat. I'll get you some coffee." He disappeared through a door in the back and returned with 2 steaming aluminum mugs. He sat across from me on a wooden stool and said, "My name is Robert, Bob Sullivan. I've had this garage for 20 years, and you're Arthur Bellwether. I know you by name. All of Dayton knows the owner of the auto parts factory." I looked at him, surprised. He shrugged and said, "It's a small town, Mr. Arthur. News travels fast." He took a sip of coffee and looked at me calmly. He didn't ask me anything, just waited, and something in that silence, in that patience, made me open my mouth. I started talking. I told him about Eleanor's funeral, about Ethan's visit the next day, about the words he said to me, about the blocked cards, the bank, the pharmacy, the restaurant, the company where they wouldn't let me in, about Audrey Price and her plastic smile, about the workers who didn't greet me, about Rosemary and the rumor of dementia. I told him everything, every humiliation, every blow, every stab in the back. I spoke for an hour without stopping, and he listened without interrupting, without judging, without offering an opinion. He just listened. If you're hearing my story right now, I ask you to leave me a comment telling me where you're listening from. Sometimes knowing there's someone out there in the world listening gives me the strength to go on, because that night, in that garage that smelled of grease and cigarettes, I felt like someone was listening to me for the first time in days. Bob didn't know me. He owed me nothing. He had no reason to help me. And yet, there he was, listening to me as if my story mattered, as if I mattered. And that, in that moment, was more valuable than all the money Ethan had stolen from me. When I finished talking, I felt empty, exhausted, as if I had vomited everything I had inside. Bob was quiet for a moment, staring at his coffee mug. Then he looked up and said, "Mr. Art, I'm going to tell you something. You're not crazy. Anyone who listens to you for 5 minutes can see you've got a clearer head than most. What's happening to you isn't your fault. You're being hunted. And someone who hunts like that, with that kind of coldness, doesn't stop until the job is done. Your son won't stop until you have nothing. No money, no company, no name. So you have 2 choices. Either you let yourself be hunted, or you start to fight back." I looked at him in silence. He was right. Of course he was right, but with what? I had no money. I had no access to my accounts. I had no lawyer. I had no proof of anything. I said, "And how do I fight, Bob? I have nothing." He nodded and stood up. He went to the small kitchen in the back and came back with a plate. It had 2 buttermilk biscuits, a piece of cheese, and a banana. He put it in front of me and said, "First, you eat. How long has it been since you ate?" I tried to remember. Yesterday? The day before? I didn't know. My stomach ached, but not from hunger, from nerves, from rage. I picked up a biscuit and took a bite. It was cold, but it was the most delicious thing I had tasted in days. Bob watched me eat and said, "After you eat, we'll think." I ate everything he put in front of me. Every bite brought back a little bit of strength. When I finished, Bob cleared the plates and said, "Look, Mr. Arthur, I'm not a lawyer or a businessman or anything like that. I'm a mechanic. I fix cars. But I know a thing or two about life. Nobody fights well if they don't sleep and eat. Tonight, you stay here. I have a little room in the back where I sometimes sleep when I have to work late. It's not the Hilton, but it has a mattress and a blanket. Tomorrow, with a clear head, We'll figure out what to do." I looked at him, not knowing what to say. This man didn't know me. He had no obligation to me, and he was offering me more than my own son. The little room was small, a single mattress on some wooden planks, a grey blanket that smelled of cheap fabric softener, a crucifix tacked to the wall, a small window that looked out onto an alley. I lay down, fully clothed with my shoes on, staring at the tin roof. Outside I could hear crickets and the distant sound of cars. I thought of Eleanor. I thought of our big bed with the cotton sheets she washed every week. I thought of how her hair smelled when she hugged me at night, and I wondered what she would say if she saw me there, sleeping in a mechanic's garage, hiding from my own son. I closed my eyes and felt tears roll down my temples, but I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall. That night, I slept. I don't know for how many hours, 3 or 6 or 10, but I slept. I really slept. Without nightmares, without waking up, startled. And when I woke up, with the sun streaming through the little window, I felt something I hadn't felt since Eleanor's funeral. Hope. I didn't know how I was going to fight. I didn't know with what weapons or with what allies. But I knew one thing: I wasn't alone. There was a 70-year-old mechanic who believed in me, who had given me shelter, food, and something more important, dignity. Bob had given me refuge, but the weapons to fight would come from someone else, someone I didn't expect, someone who had as much to lose as I did. Bob woke me up with a cup of coffee and some news. He said, "Mr. Arthur, I put some gas in your car. It's not much, but it's enough to get you home and back. Go. Take care of your business, and if you need anything, I'm here. What we have in abundance here is grease, and what we lack is cash, but there's always a cup of coffee and a biscuit." He gave my shoulder a squeeze and walked me to the car. Before I got in, he said, "Remember what I told you? Someone who hunts like that doesn't stop until it's over. Move fast, Mr. Arthur. Don't give them time to finish you off." I nodded, started the engine, and drove toward my house with a knot in my stomach. I didn't know what was waiting for me, but something told me it wasn't going to be good. I arrived home around noon. Everything looked the same from the outside. The garden with the rose bushes Eleanor tended, the bougainvillea climbing the wall, the wooden door I had commissioned from a craftsman in the Hocking Hills. But when I went inside, I knew. Something had happened. The office door was open. I always left it closed. I walked toward it with my heart pounding in my chest, and when I entered, I felt the air leave my lungs. The desk drawers were open, rummaged through, papers scattered on the floor, the bookshelf moved. And in the spot where the desktop computer used to be, there were only loose cables and a mark in the dust. They had taken it. Everything, the computer, the file folders, the backup hard drive, the USB drives. 40 years of records gone. I stood there in the middle of the mess, unable to move. Then I heard footsteps behind me. I turned and saw Clara in the doorway. Her eyes were red and her hands were trembling. She said in a broken voice, "Mr. Arthur, forgive me. I tried to stop him, but I couldn't." I asked her what she was talking about, and she told me. Yesterday afternoon, Ryan, my grandson, came with a black SUV and 2 guys she didn't know. He said Mr. Ethan had sent him to pick up important documents, that it was orders, that it was for his grandpa's own good. Clara told him he couldn't take anything without my permission, but Ryan ignored her. They went into the office, emptied everything into boxes, and left. In less than an hour, they left nothing behind. Clara tried to call me, but my phone wasn't working, and she didn't know where to find me. I sat down in the desk chair and stared at the empty space where the computer had been. On that machine was everything. 40 years of contracts, financial statements, correspondence with clients and suppliers, minutes from board meetings, powers of attorney, everything that proved who I was and what I had. Built. And now it was in Ethan's hands. I told Clara, "It's not your fault, you couldn't have done anything." But inside, I felt the net closing in. Every day they took something more. First the money, then the company, then my name, and now the documents, the proof, the memory. They were erasing me piece by piece, and I didn't know how to stop them. Clara was still standing in the doorway, wringing her hands. I told her to sit down. She obeyed, but didn't look at me. Her eyes were fixed on the floor. Then she said, there's something else I have to tell you." I felt a coldness in my stomach. She took a deep breath and continued. "Mr. Ethan called me yesterday afternoon after they took the things. He told me they don't need me anymore, that starting next week the house will be empty, that you're going to a specialized clinic and the property is going to be put up for sale." I froze. I repeated, "A clinic?" Clara nodded. "That's what he said. A clinic for people with problems in their head, and that I had nothing left to do here." I looked her in the eyes. Clara Reyes, 15 years working in this house. She came when Eleanor started showing the first symptoms, and we needed help. She stayed all these years, taking care of both of us. Eleanor trusted her more than anyone. She told her things she didn't tell me. She asked for her advice. She gave her the pearl necklace she inherited from her mother. And now Ethan was throwing her out like an old piece of furniture. I said, "Clara, listen to me carefully. I'm not going to any clinic, I'm not crazy, and this house is not for sale. My son is lying. He's trying to take everything from me, but I won't let him." She lifted her eyes. I saw tears, and I also saw something else. She wanted to believe me, but she was afraid. Clara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said, "I believe you, Mr. Arthur. I've known you for 15 years. I know you're not wrong in the head, but Mr. Ethan, he's saying very ugly things to everyone, to the neighbors, to the people at the company, to anyone who will listen. He says, you don't remember things, that you get lost in the street, that you confuse people. He says you're a danger to yourself, and people are believing him, sir. People are believing him because he says it with such confidence, and because you haven't come out to deny it." I fell silent. She was right. I had hidden. I had been paralyzed, and in the meantime, Ethan had taken control of the narrative, of my life, of my story. I took Clara's hand. It was cold, trembling. I said, "Thank you for telling me the truth, for not treating me like a crazy man. Now I need you to do something for me." She nodded, waiting. I said, "Go home, rest, collect what they owe you, and don't come back until I call you. And above all, don't tell anyone we spoke. Not Ethan, not anyone in the family, not the neighbors, no one." She looked at me with wide eyes. She asked, "What are you going to do, Mr. Arthur?" I said, "I'm going to fight, but I need to do it in silence. If Ethan knows I'm reacting, he'll move faster. I need time." She nodded, stood up, and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Take care, sir, and God bless you." Then she was gone, and I was left alone. I walked through the empty house. Every room was ablow. The kitchen where Eleanor prepared her famous pot roast every Christmas, the dining room where we celebrated my mother's 80th birthday, the bedroom where my 2 sons were born, because Eleanor didn't want to go to the hospital. Everything was the same, and everything was different. The silence was thick, heavy, like a wet blanket. Eleanor's scent still lingered in some corners, in the closet, in the curtains, on the pillow I hadn't washed. But every day it grew fainter, more distant. Soon it would disappear, and I would be left alone with the walls, if they even let me stay. I thought, I need help. I need someone who knows the law, someone who knows how this works, someone who can help me fight. Then I thought of Theo Morris, a childhood friend. We grew up together in the same neighborhood, went to the same school, played on the same football team. He studied law while I went into business. He became a corporate lawyer, specializing in business law. For 40 years, he was my legal advisor. He helped me incorporate the company, sign contracts, resolve disputes. He was honest, intelligent, loyal. But we hadn't spoken in 2 years. A stupid fight over politics at a dinner party. We argued, said things we shouldn't have, and neither of us was proud enough to pick up the phone afterward. Eleanor used to tell me to call him, that life is short, that pride is poison. But I didn't listen to her, and now she was gone. And I needed Theo more than ever. I went to the landline in the living room, the only phone still working in the house. I picked up the receiver and dialed Theo's number. I still knew it by heart. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I thought, he's not going to answer. He doesn't want anything to do with me. Then I heard a click and a gruff voice said, "Hello?" It was him. I felt my throat tighten. I said, "Theo, it's Arthur Bellwether." There was a long silence. Then he said, "Arthur, it's been a long time." I said, "Theo, I need your help. I need your help. Trouble, serious trouble. My son is destroying me." Another silence. Then he said, "Come to my office tomorrow at 10 and bring everything you have." He hung up without saying goodbye, but it didn't matter. I was going to see him. I had a chance. Theo agreed to help me, but the evidence that changed everything didn't come from him. It was brought to me by someone I didn't expect, someone who knocked on my door that very night. It was almost 11 at night when I heard a knock on the door. 3 soft, almost timid taps. I got up from the couch, where I was sitting in the dark, staring at nothing, and walked slowly to the entrance. Since Eleanor's funeral, I hadn't received any visitors. The neighbors stopped coming by, friends stopped calling. The house had become an island. I looked through the peephole and saw a figure in the dim light. A slender woman, dark hair pulled back. I recognized her immediately. It was Jessica, Ethan's wife, my daughter-in-law. The one who had stood in my living room on the day of the coup, staring at the floor while her husband stole my life. I hesitated for a moment. Then I opened the door. She came in quickly, almost pushing past me, and closed the door behind her. Her eyes were wide. She kept looking back as if someone might have followed her. I looked at her closely and saw that she was a wreck, pale as paper, deep, almost black circles under her eyes. Her hands were shaking. She was clutching a manila folder to her chest as if it were a life raft. I said, "Jessica, what are you doing here? Is something wrong?" She looked at me with the eyes of a cornered animal. She said, "Father-in-law, I have to show you something. If I don't do it now, I won't have the courage later. And you need to see this. You need to know what's happening." Her voice was a thread, breaking with every word. I told her to sit down, but she shook her head. "I don't have time. Ethan thinks I went to the 24-hour pharmacy. If I'm gone too long, he'll get suspicious." She sat on the edge of the couch, not leaning back, and placed the folder on the coffee table. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a stack of printed sheets. Jessica began to pull out the papers one by one, explaining each one. "I found all of this on Ethan's computer. He has a hidden folder. He thought no one would ever see it, but I saw it and I copied everything." They were emails, dozens of emails, between Ethan and a man named Victor Thorne. I knew the name, an investor from Columbus who had wanted to buy part of the company a few years ago. I had said no. He seemed shady, too aggressive, and now he was in contact with my son. The emails talked about corporate restructuring, liquidation of non-performing assets, removal of the majority shareholder due to mental incapacity. I read it 3 times to be sure I understood. They were planning to take the company from me legally, with papers, with lawyers, with everything. I kept reading. Each page was worse than the last. There were purchase agreements with future dates, stock transfers I never authorized, powers of attorney with my forged signature. I knew it was forged because I never sign with that flourish. Eleanor taught me to create a signature that no one could copy, and that wasn't my signature. There were also requests for medical opinions addressed to 3 different psychiatrists. They were asking for evaluations of severe cognitive decline for an 82-year-old patient. The patient was me. The requests were signed by Ethan as the responsible family member. Everything was dated, everything was organized, everything was ready to be executed. Only one thing was missing: the signature of a judge declaring me legally incompetent. One of the emails made my blood run cold. It was dated 3 days before Eleanor's funeral. It said, "Victor, the old lady is about to kick the bucket. As soon as that happens, we move. I have everything ready. Tell your people to prepare the documents. The old man won't know what hit him." And further down, Victor replied, "Perfect. Between the company and the real estate, we're talking about $80 million. You get 40%, and I get the rest. In 60 days, we're partners." I felt my stomach turn over. I read it again and again. My son, my own son. He had been planning this for months while Eleanor was dying in the hospital, while I held her hand and promised her she would be okay. Ethan was in his office calculating how much he would gain from his mother's death and his father's destruction. I put the papers down on the table and just stared at them, saying nothing. My hands were shaking. I felt nauseous. I felt the room spinning. Jessica was looking at me with her eyes full of tears. She said, "Father-in-law, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know any of this. I knew Ethan was ambitious. I knew he wanted the company, but I didn't know he was capable of this. Of destroying his own father, of forging documents, of hiring psychiatrists to declare you insane." Her voice broke. When I saw it, I couldn't stay quiet. I just couldn't. I asked her, "Why bring this to me, Jessica? Why not go to the police?" She shook her head. "Because the police won't believe me. Ethan has connections, he has money, he has lawyers. You're the only one who can do something with this." I got up from the couch, walked to the window, and stared out at the empty street. I thought of Eleanor in the last week of her life, when the pain wouldn't let her sleep. One night she squeezed my hand very tight and said, "Arthur, be careful with Ethan. He's not the son you think he is. I've seen things, I've heard things. Promise me you'll open your eyes." I told her yes, of course, to calm down, but I didn't pay her any mind. I thought it was the morphine talking. I thought she was confused. But she wasn't. Eleanor knew. Eleanor saw what I refused to see, and she tried to warn me, and I didn't listen. Now she was dead, and I was alone, with a stack of papers that proved my son was a monster. I turned back to Jessica. She was still sitting on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped on her knees. I asked, "Does Ethan suspect anything?" She shook her head. "No, I did it when he wasn't home. I copied everything to a USB and deleted the history. But if he finds out—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. I knew what Ethan was capable of. I asked, "Why did you do it, Jessica? You're his wife. You have a son with him. Why risk everything like this?" She looked at me with wet eyes and said, "Because I can't take it anymore, father-in-law. I've been putting up with it for years. The marriage has been dead for a long time. I only stay for Ryan. But this is too much. What Ethan is doing to you, I can't be a part of that. You don't deserve this. I can't look you in the face, knowing what I know." Jessica stood up. She had to leave before Ethan got suspicious. I said, "Jessica, what you did today comes with a price. If Ethan finds out, he'll come. After you, after Ryan, after everything." She nodded. "I know, but you always treated me well. Mrs. Eleanor loved me like a daughter. She taught me how to make her pot roast. She gave me her mother's necklace when Ryan was born. She told me once, 'If Ethan ever gets difficult, come find me, I'll help you.' But she's not here anymore, so I came to you." I felt a lump in my throat. I said, "Thank you, my dear, thank you for being brave. I won't let you pay for this alone, I promise you." She gave me a quick hug, grabbed her purse and walked to the door. Before leaving, she turned and said, "Destroy him, father-in-law. Destroy Ethan before he destroys you." Then she slipped out the back door, disappearing into the night. I was left alone in the living room with the papers scattered on the table. I looked at them for a long time. Each one was a stab wound. Every email, every contract, every forged signature. But they were also something else. They were proof. Proof that I wasn't crazy. Proof that there was a plan. Proof that my son was a criminal. I thought of Theo, of the meeting I had tomorrow. Now I had something to show him, something concrete, something he could use. But I also thought of Jessica, of the risk she had taken, of what would happen to her if Ethan discovered the truth. And I thought of Eleanor, of her final warning, of how she tried to protect me from beyond the grave. I closed my eyes and said out loud, "Forgive me, my love. Forgive me for not listening. But I promise you I'm going to fix this. I promise." I didn't sleep that night. I sat. On the couch with Jessica's documents in my hands, reading them over and over, memorizing every detail, every date, every name, every figure. When dawn broke, my eyes were burning and my head was full of numbers. But I also had something I hadn't had in days: ammunition. Jessica had given me the weapons to fight. Now I just needed an army. Theo was the first, but I was going to need more. I was going to need someone from inside the family, someone who knew Ethan, someone who had as much to lose as I did. And then I thought of Benjamin, my younger son, the one who moved to Houston years ago, the one who rarely called, the one who seemed to have forgotten about me. It was time to find him, time to see which side he was on. If this story is reaching your heart, subscribe now. Every day someone is telling what they could never say out loud. Leave your comment and tell me if you've ever experienced something similar. At 10 o'clock the next morning, I was sitting in Theo Morris's office. It was a small office filled with law books stacked to the ceiling, smelling of old coffee and yellowed paper. Theo was on the other side of the desk with Jessica's documents spread out in front of him. He read them slowly, his brow furrowed, running his hand over his bald head every time he found something new. I watched him in silence, my heart pounding in my throat. When he finished, he put the papers down on the table and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on him before, a mix of rage and astonishment. He said, "Arthur, this is corporate fraud, forgery of documents, attempted illegal interdiction. Your son could go to jail and so could Victor Thorne. This is serious, very serious." I asked him what we could do. Theo leaned back in his chair and thought for a moment. Then he said, "First, we need to block the interdiction. If Ethan manages to get a judge to declare you incompetent, we lose everything. I'm going to file for an emergency injunction. Second, we need more witnesses. Jessica is key, but one person isn't enough. We need people from inside the company, shareholders who are loyal to you, someone from the family who can testify in your favor." I thought again of Benjamin, the one who left for Houston 10 years ago because he couldn't stand Ethan's personality, the one who didn't come to his mother's funeral because he was late to the airport. Or so he said. Theo let me use his phone, and I dialed Benjamin's number. It rang 4 times. I thought he wouldn't answer. Then I heard his hoarse, tired voice. "Hello?" I said. "Benjamin, it's me, your father." A long silence. Then he said, "Dad, what's wrong? Are you okay?" I told him no, that I wasn't okay, that his brother was destroying me. I told him everything. The coup, the cards, the bank, the restaurant, the company, Jessica's documents, the interdiction, everything. I talked for 15 minutes straight, and he listened in silence. When I finished, there was another long pause. I thought he was going to tell me he couldn't get involved, that he had his life in Houston, that this was between Ethan and me. But then he said something that broke me. "I'm on my way, Dad. Forgive me for not coming sooner. I knew something was wrong, but I was afraid of Ethan. I was always afraid of him." 2 days later, Benjamin arrived in Dayton. I saw him walk through the door of Theo's office and felt my knees buckle. He was thinner than I remembered, with grey at his temples and wrinkles around his eyes, but he still had the same face as when he was a boy, the same face as Eleanor. He walked over to me and hugged me tight, without saying a word. I felt my shoulders shake and realized I was crying. He was too. We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the middle of Theo's office, crying like two lost children. Then he pulled away, looked me in the eyes and said, "I'm not leaving you alone, Dad. I promise. We're going to end this together." And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could win. For the next 3 days, we worked non-stop. Theo prepared the lawsuit and the request for the injunction. Benjamin contacted 3 old shareholders of the company who had always been loyal to me: Mr. Porter, who was my first partner, Mr. Harrison, my second cousin, and Mr. Edwards, an investor who joined in the 90s. All 3 agreed to support me. Jessica, meanwhile, continued to gather evidence. Every night she sent me encrypted emails with more documents from Ethan's computer, contracts, transfers, messages with Victor Thorne. Everything was adding up. Everything was fitting together. It seemed like the plan was working. It seemed like we were going to succeed. But on Thursday morning, everything fell apart. Jessica disappeared. I tried calling her cell phone. Off. I sent her messages. No response. I wrote to her email. Nothing. I called the house and the maid answered. She told me Mrs. Jessica had left early with Mr. Ethan and hadn't returned, that she took a small suitcase, that Mr. Ethan said they were going to Columbus for a few days. I felt a hole in my stomach. Something was wrong. Very wrong. I told Theo and Benjamin to come with me. We drove to Ethan's house in the Las Lomas subdivision. I rang the bell, waited. The door opened and there he was, my eldest son, with a smile that chilled me to the bone. Ethan leaned against the doorframe and looked at me with a frightening calm. He said, "Dad, what a surprise. What are you doing here?" I told him I was looking for Jessica, that I needed to talk to her. He widened his smile, a wolf's smile. "Ah, Jessica. Yes, she's resting. I took her to a clinic in Columbus. A very nice place, very quiet. The stress of grieving really got to her, you know. She started having insomnia, anxiety, strange ideas. The doctor said she needed rest, a few weeks of inpatient care for her own good." I looked him in the eyes. I knew exactly what he had done. Jessica wasn't sick. Jessica had betrayed him, and he had gotten his revenge. I took a step closer. I said, "Ethan, I know what you did. I know everything. The contracts, the transfers, the emails with Victor Thorne, the forged signatures, the interdiction, everything." He didn't lose his smile. "I don't know what you're talking about, Dad. I think you're confused again. I told you, you're not well. You should go get checked out." Benjamin stepped forward. "That's enough, Ethan. We know what you're doing, and we're going to stop it." Ethan looked at him with contempt. "Well, look who showed up. The prodigal son, the one who ran off to Houston because he couldn't handle the pressure. Now you come back to play the hero." Benjamin clenched his fists. I grabbed his arm. I said, "Let's go. There's nothing more to do here." And we left, with our blood boiling and our spirits crushed. Back in Theo's office, I collapsed into a chair. I said, "Jessica was our star witness, the one with access to everything. Without her, the case is weaker. Ethan knows that. That's why he locked her up." Theo was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he said, "Wait. Before she disappeared, Jessica did something clever, something very clever." I looked at him, not understanding. He opened his computer and showed me his email inbox. There were 3 messages from Jessica, sent the night before she disappeared, each to a different address. Mine, Benjamin's, and a third I didn't recognize. All 3 contained the same thing: copies of all the documents, all the emails, all the evidence. Jessica had sent backups as insurance in case something happened to her. Theo closed the computer and looked at me. He said, "Your daughter-in-law knew this could happen. She knew Ethan would find out sooner or later. That's why she sent everything beforehand. The evidence is safe. The case is still on." I felt a relief that loosened my muscles, but I also felt anguish because Jessica was still locked in a clinic in Columbus, alone, scared, paying the price for having helped me. I told Theo, "We have to get her out of there." He nodded. "I'm going to request a court order, but I need more. I need something that proves the commitment was forced. I need another witness." I fell silent. Another witness. Who else knew what was happening? Then I thought of someone who had been there the whole time, someone who saw everything without anyone seeing her. And 2 days later, that person knocked on the door. It was 2 days before the shareholders' meeting when I heard a knock at the door of Theo's office. It was 7 in the evening, already getting dark. Theo went to open it, and I heard a woman's voice, a voice I knew. I peeked into the hallway and saw her. Clara, my Clara, the woman who worked in my house for 15 years, was standing in the doorway with a grocery bag clutched to her chest, trembling like a leaf. Theo looked at her suspiciously. "Who are you?" She swallowed hard and said, "I'm Clara Reyes. I worked for Mr. Arthur and Mrs. Eleanor for 15 years, and I have something to show you." I approached, put my hand on her shoulder and said, "Come in, Clara. You're among friends." We sat her in a chair and gave her a glass of water. Her hands trembled as she held it. Theo asked what she had brought. She took a deep breath, opened the grocery bag, and took out a stack of papers, receipts, printed photos, and a spiral notebook. She put everything on the desk. She said, "Sir, I worked in that house for 15 years. I saw things, I heard things, and I saved things because Mrs. Eleanor asked me to." Theo and I looked at each other. Clara continued, "Mr. Ethan always treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't exist. He'd talk on the phone in front of me, leave papers on the table, never greeted me, never looked at me, but I was there. I was always there, and I saw everything." Theo began to look through what Clara had brought. There were receipts for bank deposits to accounts that weren't the company's. There were photos of documents she had taken with her cell phone when Ethan left them on the dining room table. There were handwritten notes with instructions for Audrey Price. There were copies of contracts Ethan signed without my knowledge, and there was a notebook where Clara had written down every suspicious conversation she overheard for months. Dates, names, verbatim quotes, everything. Theo looked up from the papers and said, "Mrs. Clara, you saved all this for how long?" She said, "Almost a year, sir. Ever since Mrs. Eleanor asked me to." I felt my chest tighten. I asked, "Clara, Eleanor asked you to save this?" She nodded. "Yes, Mr. Arthur. It was a few months before she got very sick. She called me into her room, closed the door, and said, 'Clara, I'm seeing things I don't like. Ethan is changing. He's doing things behind our backs. I don't want to worry Arthur because he already has enough to deal with taking care of me, but I need you to be my eyes. I need you to save everything you see, write down everything you hear, and if anything ever happens to Arthur, you take it to a lawyer.' That's what she told me, and I promised her I would do it." I felt my eyes fill with tears. Eleanor, my Eleanor. She knew, she always knew, and she protected me in the only way she could. Theo gathered Clara's documents with Jessica's emails. Now he had a complete file. Emails, forged contracts, illegal transfers, first-hand testimony, photos, notes, everything. I said, "Is this enough to get Jessica out of the clinic?" He nodded. "It's enough for that and more. I'm going to request an emergency court order. With this, I can prove Jessica's commitment was forced, that there's no legitimate diagnosis, that it's a kidnapping disguised as medical treatment." He stood up, grabbed his briefcase and said, "I'm going to the courthouse right now. If we're lucky, Jessica will be free by tomorrow morning." He left the office almost at a run, and I stayed there looking at Clara, not knowing how to thank her. The next morning, Theo called me at 7. He said, "We have the order. I'm leaving for Columbus now." 3 hours later, he sent me a message. "We have her. Jessica is free. We're on our way." I felt my heart return to my chest. I sat in a chair and took a deep breath. Benjamin looked at me and said, "Are you okay, Dad?" I told him yes, that Jessica was free, that she was on her way. He smiled. It was the first time I'd seen him smile since he arrived. At 2 in the afternoon, Theo arrived at the office with Jessica. When I saw her, I felt a punch in the gut. She was thin, pale, with dark circles under her eyes. Her lips were chapped and her hair was dirty, but her eyes shone with rage, with determination. She hugged me and whispered in my ear, "I'm ready, father-in-law. I'm going to finish him." We all sat around Theo's desk. Him, me, Benjamin, Jessica, Clara. And Theo explained the situation. Ethan had called an extraordinary shareholders' meeting for Thursday. In that meeting, he was going to present a motion to remove me as president of the company due to mental incapacity. He was going to show the supposed medical reports. He was going to ask to be appointed interim president, and with the support of Victor Thorne and other shareholders he had bought, he would probably win the vote. If that happened, I would lose the company, I would lose everything, and Ethan would get away with it. Theo looked at all of us and said, "But we are going to be there, and we are going in with everything." Theo explained the plan. He would arrive at the meeting with a court order preventing any motion related to my supposed incapacity. He would present the evidence of fraud, the emails, the forged contracts, the illegal transfers. He would publicly denounce Ethan and Victor Thorne in front of all the shareholders. And most importantly, Jessica would walk in with me, Ethan's wife on her father-in-law's side. That would be a devastating blow. I asked Theo, "Do you think it will work?" He looked at me seriously and said, "Arthur, in a trial, the one with the better evidence wins, and we have the better evidence. But in a shareholders' meeting, image also matters. And the image of your enemy's wife standing next to you, that's priceless." I couldn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room of my house, looking at Eleanor's portrait above the fireplace. I thought about everything that had happened in the past few weeks. The funeral, the coup, the humiliations, the loneliness. And I also thought about the people who had appeared to help me. Bob, the mechanic who gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. Jessica, who risked everything to give me the proof. Clara, who for months saved what Eleanor had asked her to. Benjamin, who finally faced his fear and came to fight with me. Theo, who put his pride aside and agreed to help an old friend. I thought, I'm not alone. I was never alone, I just didn't know it. The next morning I went to see Bob. I told him everything, the meeting, the plan, the evidence. He listened in silence, wiping his hands with a greasy rag. When I finished, he said, "Mr. Art, I don't know anything about companies or meetings or laws. I'm a mechanic, I fix cars. But I do know one thing, I know how to be on the right side. And you're on the right side. So if you need me there, I'll be there." I looked at him with moist eyes. I said, "Bob, you've already done so much. For me, you don't have to—" He interrupted me. "Sir, I don't have to do anything, but I want to. And that's different." He gave me a handshake that felt like a hug, and I knew he would be there, that they would all be there. Thursday arrived. I woke up at 5 in the morning without needing an alarm. I took a hot shower, shaved carefully, and put on the dark suit I wore on my wedding day with Eleanor, the same one I wore the day I opened the factory, the same one I wore when I received the Entrepreneur of the Year award. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw an 82-year-old man with wrinkles and grey hair and age spots on his hands. But I also saw something else. I saw a man who hadn't given up. I saw a man who still had strength. I saw a man who was going to walk into that room and look his son in the eyes. I straightened my tie, took a deep breath, and said out loud, "Today, Ethan, you're going to find out who I am." And when I walked into that boardroom, with Jessica by my side, with Benjamin behind me, with Theo and Clara and Bob and all the others, I saw my son's face, and I knew that I had already won. The boardroom was on the 3rd floor of the building I built 40 years ago. The same walls I raised, the same marble floor I chose, the same mahogany table I had brought from North Carolina, because Eleanor said it conveyed seriousness. I arrived at 9:30 in the morning. The meeting was at 10. I parked in front of the main entrance and sat for a moment in the car looking at the facade. There was my name in gold letters, Bellwether Industrial Group, the name that cost me 40 years of work, the name my son wanted to erase. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and got out of the car. I felt the morning sun on my face and thought, this ends today. One way or another, it ends today. I saw the shareholders entering through the main door. Some I had known my whole life. Mr. Porter, my first partner. Mr. Harrison, my cousin. Mr. Edwards, who invested with me in the 90s. They nodded at me discreetly without stopping. Others were new faces, people in expensive suits and fake smiles, people connected to Victor Thorne, investors Ethan had brought in over the last few months to secure the votes. And at the door, controlling who entered and who didn't, was Audrey Price with her pantsuit, her electronic tablet, and her plastic smile. She saw me arrive and her smile froze, but she said nothing, just stood there waiting like a spider in its web. But I wasn't coming alone. Behind me was Benjamin, my younger son, with his jaw tight and his eyes fixed on the door. Beside him, Theo Morris, with a leather briefcase full of documents and the expression of someone about to go to war. Behind them, my cousin Harrison and 3 old board members from the company who had decided to support me. And at the end, walking with her back straight and her gaze forward, was Jessica, Ethan's wife, the mother of his son, the woman he locked in a clinic to silence her, and now she was here, on the enemy's side, on the right side. And seeing her, I knew we had already won the first battle, because Ethan didn't expect this. He didn't expect his own wife to betray him. We walked toward the door. Audrey Price stood in the middle, holding her tablet up like a shield. She said, "Mr. Bellwether, you are not on the guest list. You cannot enter." I looked her in the eyes, those cold eyes that had looked at me with contempt a few weeks ago. I said, "I built this building. I founded this company. I pay your salary. Step aside." She didn't move. Then Theo stepped forward, took a document from his briefcase, and put it in her face. He said, "Court order. Injunction protecting the rights of Mr. Arthur Graham Bellwether. If you try to prevent his entry, I will have you arrested for contempt of court." Audrey looked at the document, looked at Theo, looked at Jessica, and stepped aside without a word. The path was clear. We went up to the 3rd floor in the elevator. No one spoke. Only the hum of the motor and our breathing could be heard. When the doors opened, I saw the hallway leading to the boardroom. At the end, the double wooden doors were open. I could hear Ethan's voice inside, giving a speech. We walked toward it. My shoes clicked on the marble. Each step was a heartbeat. When I reached the door, I stopped. Inside, the room was full. 25 people sitting around the table, and at the head, standing in a navy blue suit and red tie, was Ethan saying, "We are here to formalize a new era in the history of this company." He saw me, and the words died in his throat. I entered the room slowly, unhurriedly, looking him in the eyes. Behind me the others followed. Benjamin, Theo, Harrison, Jessica, the board members, and finally Bob, in his clean jumpsuit and his mechanic's hands, who stood by the door like a guardian. Ethan stared at me without blinking. Then he looked at Jessica, and I saw his face crumble as if he'd been punched in the gut. I walked to the front of the room and stood before him. Theo placed the briefcase on the table, opened it, and took out a stack of documents. He dropped them with a sharp thud and said loudly, so everyone could hear, "Mr. Arthur Graham Bellwether is the sole legal president of this company. Here is the evidence of corporate fraud, document forgery, and attempted illegal interdiction committed by Ethan Bellwether and Victor Thorne." The silence was total. No one breathed. Victor Thorne, who was sitting near Ethan, jumped to his feet. He said, "This is ridiculous. It's slander. You can't just barge in here." And Theo cut him off, raising his hand. "Mr. Thorne, your name appears in 47 emails detailing the plan to strip Mr. Bellwether of his company through fraud. It also appears on stock purchase agreements that Mr. Bellwether never signed. I suggest you call your lawyer. You're going to need one." Thorne fell silent, opened his mouth and closed it. Then he turned to Ethan, looking for support, but Ethan wasn't looking at him. Ethan was looking at me, and in his eyes was something I had never seen before: fear. Theo continued speaking. He explained every document, every email, every forged contract. He showed the illegal transfers, the requests for psychiatric evaluations, the plan to lock Jessica in the clinic in Columbus. Everything. The shareholders listened in silence, with horrified faces. Some looked at Ethan, others looked at the floor. When Theo finished, he pointed to Jessica and said, "Mrs. Jessica Bellwether, wife of the accused, provided this evidence voluntarily. She was committed against her will to a psychiatric clinic in Columbus in retaliation for reporting these crimes. She was released 2 days ago by court order." He looked around the room and finished. Ethan Bellwether's own wife could not bear to see what her husband had become. That is why she is here, on the right side. Ethan was still standing at the head of the table, but he no longer seemed the same. His shoulders had slumped, his face had turned grey. He looked at me with a mixture of hatred and defeat. I took a step closer, looked him in the eyes, those eyes that were once the eyes of a boy asking me to teach him how to ride a bike, those eyes that were now the eyes of a stranger. And I said slowly, so that every word would sink in, "The day after you buried your mother, you sat in my living room and told me, 'Your good life is over, Dad.' Do you remember?" He didn't answer. I continued, "Well, today, son, you discover one thing. Your good life never began, because a good life isn't built on stealing, it isn't built on lying, it isn't built on destroying your own flesh and blood." Ethan lowered his head. He said nothing. He had nothing to say. Audrey Price had disappeared through the back door. Victor Thorne was slumped in his chair with his phone in his hand, dialing desperately. The shareholders looked at each other, not knowing what to do. Then Mr. Porter, my first partner, the man who was with me from the beginning, stood up, looked at me and said, "Arthur, this company was always yours, and it still is. You have my vote." Then Harrison stood up, then Mr. Edwards, then others. One by one, the shareholders who truly knew me stood up. Some applauded, others nodded their heads. And I just stood there, in front of my defeated son, feeling the weight I had carried for weeks finally lift from my shoulders. I didn't smile, I didn't celebrate, I didn't shout for joy. I just took a deep breath and looked around me. I saw Benjamin with moist eyes and a trembling smile. I saw Theo closing his briefcase with the satisfaction of a job. Well done. I saw Jessica, pale but firm, looking at her husband with an expression that wasn't hatred but pity. I saw Clara, who had slipped in at the end without my noticing, standing next to Bob by the door, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. And I saw Bob, the mechanic who gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go, looking at me with pride, as if I were his own father. I said to them all, "Thank you. Just that. Thank you." Then I looked up at the ceiling, toward where I imagined Eleanor was, and I Thought we did it, my love. We did it together, as always. But the story wasn't over yet. There was one last conversation, the most difficult of all. 2 days after the meeting, I called Ethan and asked him to come to the house. Just him. No lawyers, no Jessica, no one. I wanted to talk to my son one last time. I wanted to look him in the eyes and understand. He agreed. He arrived at 5 in the afternoon, when the sun was already setting and a golden light streamed through the windows. I opened the door and saw him. He was gaunt, with deep circles under his eyes, his tie loose, his suit wrinkled. He looked like he had aged 10 years in 2 days. I let him pass without a word. We walked to the living room and sat in the same places we had sat on the day of the coup. He in Eleanor's chair, me on the sofa across from him, the same room, the same light, but everything was different. This time, I was the one with the power. We sat in silence for a moment. He stared at the floor. I watched him. Finally, I spoke. I said, "Ethan, I'm going to ask you a question and I want you to answer me with the truth. Even if it hurts, even if it's horrible. The truth." He nodded without looking up. I took a deep breath and asked, "Did you ever love me, son?" The silence grew thick, long. He kept staring at the floor. I saw his jaw tremble, saw him clench his fists on his knees. 10 seconds passed, 20, 30. I thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he looked up and met my eyes. And what I saw there broke my heart. It wasn't malice, it wasn't hatred, it was pain, an old, deep, festering pain. Ethan spoke slowly, his voice hoarse. "I don't know, Dad. I don't know if I ever loved you. What I know is that I always wanted to be like you. Since I was a kid, I wanted you to look at me the way you looked at the company. I wanted you to be proud of me the way you were proud of your achievements. But I never could. I was never enough. Benjamin was the sensitive one, the good one, the one who was like Mom. And I was the ambitious one, the tough one, the one who never did anything right. Every time I tried something, you corrected me. Every time I proposed something, you improved it. You never let me win. You never let me shine. And that rotted me from the inside out until one day I realized that the only way to be like you was to take everything from you." I listened without interrupting. Every word was like a knife, but not of anger, of sadness, because I realized he was right. Not in what he did, there is no justification for that, but in what he felt. I had seen him as my heir, not as my son. I had trained him to take my place, but I never asked him if he wanted that place. I never asked him what he dreamed of, what he needed, what hurt him. I raised him to be strong, but I didn't teach him to ask for help. I raised him to win, but I didn't teach him to lose. And he became this, a man who knew nothing but how to destroy, because he never learned to build on his own foundations, only on mine. I said, "Ethan, what you did is unforgivable. You tried to rob me, you tried to lock me up, you tried to erase me, and you did it while your mother was dying in a hospital. I will never forget that." He nodded without saying a word. I continued, "But you are my son, and I don't want to see you in prison. I don't want Ryan to grow up visiting his father in a penitentiary, so I'm going to give you a way out, one way out." He looked at me with wide eyes. I said, "You are going to resign from the company today. You are going to return every cent you embezzled. You are going to apologize to Jessica on your knees if necessary, and you are going to disappear for a while, somewhere far away, where no one knows you, where you can start over. If you do all of that, I will drop the charges, and this ends here." Ethan looked at me in silence. Then he asked, "And if I don't accept?" I looked him in the eye and said, "Then I let justice decide. Theo has everything ready to file the lawsuit. Corporate fraud, forgery of documents, kidnapping. You will go to trial and you will lose. Not because of me, but because of the evidence. And when you lose, you will go to prison. A minimum of 5 years, a maximum of 15. So you decide, son. You can disappear with dignity, or you can disappear in a cell. He was quiet for a long moment. I saw his hands shake, saw him clench his jaw, saw him look around the room as if searching for an escape that didn't exist. Finally, he stood up, looked at me and said, "I accept." Then he walked to the door and left without saying goodbye, without looking back, without another word. That was the last time I saw Ethan. A week later, he signed his resignation before a notary. He returned the embezzled money, most of it, as Victor Thorne had already spent part of it. He wrote a letter to Jessica asking for forgiveness and left for Spain. To Madrid, I was told. He has a contact there who got him a job in imports. I don't know how he's doing, I don't ask. Ryan stayed with Jessica. Sometimes he visits me on Sundays. We don't talk much, but he's there. And that's something. Jessica filed for divorce and got it in 3 months. I did what I had to do. I gave her 10% of the company's shares. She didn't want to accept. She said she hadn't done it for money. I told her, I know, that's why I'm giving it to you. Now she has a nice house downtown with a garden for Ryan. She opened an art gallery with a partner. She's doing well. She smiles more. Sometimes she comes over for coffee, and we talk about Eleanor, about the old days, about what she did for me when no one else dared, and I always tell her the same thing. Thank you, my dear. Without you, I wouldn't be here. I stayed on as president of the company for another 6 months, just enough time to get everything in order, to close the bad contracts, to get rid of Victor Thorne's people, to restore confidence in the shareholders who had been scared off, and to do something I owed myself. I had Bob's garage remodeled, new roof, polished concrete floor, top-of-the-line tools, a sign with his name at the entrance. He didn't want to accept. He said he was fine as he was, that he didn't need anything. I told him, Bob, you gave me shelter when I had nowhere to go. You gave me coffee when I couldn't even afford bread. You gave me dignity when my own son had taken it from me. This isn't charity, it's justice. He was quiet for a moment. Then he gave me a handshake and said, All right, sir, but the Sunday coffee is still on the house. When everything at the company was stable, I called Benjamin into my office. I sat him down across from me and said, Son, I've done my part. 42 years at the head of this company. I don't have the strength for it anymore. I want to go home. I want to take care of your mother's roses. I want to live what's left of my life in peace, so the company is yours. He looked at me with moist eyes and said, I want it, Dad, and I promise I'll take care of it. We signed the papers that same afternoon. Today, my life is quiet. I wake up early, as always. I have breakfast alone in the kitchen with the radio on low. I go out to the garden to water the roses Eleanor planted 30 years ago. I prune them. I talk to them. I tell them how everything is going. Then I sit on the iron bench we bought on a trip to Savannah, and I watch the sky for a while. At 11, Clara arrives. She came back to work for me last month. I doubled her salary and gave her her own key. She's not my employee anymore. She's my family. On Sundays, I go to Bob's garage. We drink coffee from his aluminum mugs and talk about everything and nothing. Sometimes he helps me fix something on the car. Sometimes we just sit in silence, listening to the radio. And that's okay. It's okay. People ask me if I hate Ethan, if I want to see him destroyed, if I'm glad he lost everything. And the truth is, no, I don't hate him. I can't. He's my son. He has my blood. He has Eleanor's nose. He has my father's hands. How can I hate that? Hatred is a prison, and I've been imprisoned for too long, but I don't forgive him either, not yet. Maybe never, because forgiving isn't forgetting. Forgiving is letting go of the weight so you can walk. And I've let go of the weight, but I haven't forgotten what happened. I haven't forgotten the day he sat in Eleanor's chair and told me my good life was over. I haven't forgotten the humiliations. I haven't forgotten the lies. I haven't forgotten Jessica locked in a clinic. You don't forget that. You carry it, but you can carry it without it crushing you. If someone going through something similar were to ask for my advice, I would say this: don't give up. Even if your own blood betrays you, even if they take everything from you, even if they tell you you're crazy, even if they look at you with pity, even if they close every door in your face, even if they leave you all alone, you are still you. Your name, your story, your dignity. No one can steal that from you. They can take your money, they can take your company, they can take your reputation, but they can't take who you are. And if you stay standing, if you don't give up, if you ask for help, even if you're ashamed to, you will find good people. People like Bob, people like Theo, people like Clara, people who show up when you need them most. And with those people, you can fight and you can win. I won. At 82 years old, with no money, no phone, no access to my accounts, I won. So you can too. And you, who have listened to me this far, have you ever been betrayed by someone in your own family? What did you do? What would you do differently if you could go back? Leave your answer in the comments. Tell me your story, because sometimes telling what happened is the first step to healing. If this story touched your heart, I ask you to give it a like and subscribe to the channel. Your comment helps me continue telling these stories. Stories of ordinary people, stories of pain, stories of struggle, stories like yours. Thank you for listening to the end. I'll see you in the next story.